what would you say to someone maybe who has a deal, a possible subdivision, or maybe they need to work with the county on something, but they're unfamiliar? What's the path to just continue to work on that and make it happen?
Yeah, sure. So if I want to make sure it's as specific as possible for anybody watching this. I'd probably say specific to minor subdivisions because major subdivisions would be a whole other beast, right? So not looking at it as a land flip, looking at it as something that you've vetted the county muni code. So usually step one on a minor subdivision, you're going through the land development code and you're checking if there's a section for minor subdivisions. And there usually always is. And they might call it something different, right? But they'll usually tell you how many lots you can split one greater parcel. And you have to usually meet a couple different requirements. First one, the minimum lot size, and second one being minimum road frontage. And then beyond that, it starts getting a little nuanced. But those are really the main two. So as long as you meet all that kind of stuff and you're looking at it, first step is call your planning and zoning department, hands down, always. You're going to get the technician that's on call. And usually the way I go about that is I'll have the muni code up, I'll have the section there, and I'll just confirm a few things. Hey, can I do a flag lot? Because usually that's not written in that minor subdivision section of the code. So I might be able to squeeze an extra parcel or something that doesn't have enough road frontage, but as a flag lot, it requires less road frontage. And just to define flag lot for people listening, in case you don't know what a flag lot is, if you got a square, instead of splitting it and you only have enough road frontage to do two lots, right? So you split it down the middle with a survey. Instead, you might do two and then have a little skinny run on the side that opens up to a bigger parcel in the back. And so now you have three lots instead of two. And it looks like a flag because it's basically the pole, a little skinny easement, and then the bigger section in the back. So that's usually one of my top questions I'll ask you about flag lots and just working through that technician, kind of forming that relationship. Because if it's something that you go through with, that you're going to make the purchase, it makes a lot of sense. You're going to be dealing with that department a lot. So just making sure you always got your best charismatic voice on and just being optimistic, happy. It's people can always sense a smile in how you speak, and it goes a long way. I find that a lot of folks will do a lot of favors for you without even knowing you, just based on your tone, your tonality on a call. So yeah, definitely calling planning and zoning first, getting really deep into that code, the muni code for that specific county, and also just leveraging knowledge online. So there's always forums out there. I mentioned Pete Reese's forum. X is a great place. There's a lot of folks there that are constantly talking about land, and it's not really even that big of a community. It's maybe like 10 to 15 of us, but everybody's got like thousands of followers. So that always stuck out to me is how going on there and talking to the 10 or 15 folks that are out there, or I get messages all the time asking me questions, and I'm always happy to answer whatever I can. There's a lot of people out there, and they're all very friendly and looking to help. So at the end of the day, we've only been doing this for a relatively short amount of time. So I still identify as a newbie.
Mhm. When you're talking about the county and the planning department, how much leeway or how much play do you think is in the answers they give, how much they're willing to work with you? What's the difference between just looking at what's possible and just saying, here's what's possible versus coming up with creative solutions with the county? How much extra is there in that?
Yeah, sure. So in minor subdivisions, I would say none. In major subdivisions, I would say a lot. Simply because so major subdivisions usually qualify under something called a PUD, a planned urban development. And that is, you're working within the confines of zoning in major subdivisions, but there's a lot of politics involved in that. Right. The neighbor may say, I've got an issue with this when they show up to the commission hearing, and now you got to put a tan fence. This is a real example on one of my projects. You got to add a berm and landscaping and all kinds of stuff to appease the neighbors. The county may require that you save additional trees just because they want some existing trees, which creates issues for our grading and what we're doing on site. There's all kinds of stuff that you work through with the folks in the county. In major subdivisions, it becomes those relationships really come into play because on the really big projects, they're out there, right? They're looking at everything. Whereas like when it comes to minor subdivisions and everything, you're just dealing with like a staff level, a technician, someone that's going to help you understand the code. So it really is just that. It's per the code. So there's really no leeway when it comes to those minor subdivisions because it's just by the book stuff. It's not really, for lack of better words, it's not really big enough for them to really care that much about to do favors for anybody. So yeah, it's minor subdividing really comes down to knowing what counties to pursue. 67 counties in Florida. I've called about 90% of those county offices to confirm and go through their muni code on exactly how many lots I can do, what road frontage is required, all that kind of stuff. So I've learned what the best counties are, and I target those. And that is probably one piece of information. I apologize to anybody listening to this that I won't share because that took me dozens and dozens of hours to find the best two counties in Florida. And I'll tell you, that's the process, right? Anybody who wants to do it, go and do it. But there are a couple counties in Florida that are just far outshine all the other counties and make minor subdivides a lot easier. And I'm working through my first one right now, which is pretty awesome. Bought it for 220, got the survey, just working through putting my plating package together, which includes some calls to the postmaster and a traffic engineer where I'm getting like an exemption letter from doing a traffic impact analysis. So there's some minor little things that you learn along the way. You just got to take the action and roll with it. I bought it for 220, and once I split it, it's worth about probably 500. So that's a really good one. And because of that, I'm basically just all in on that county. I'm calling all those numbers myself as opposed to my team calling them, just because there's probably a couple $1 million hiding in that list. So
That's interesting. What about states that are good targets for possible easy subdivides? People obviously can
well,
touch the counties within those.
says I only do Florida. On Florida, it really is. I personally think it's the best state. Always hear a lot of people that say they avoid Florida because it's so competitive, but it's competitive because the demand is unparalleled. There is no other state that's getting as much immigration into Florida. It's not even close. I think Texas is in second, and they're at like half of the immigration that Florida's getting. So the demand is just my active days on market. And this is with rejecting offers that would still make me money, is probably 4 months for anything I buy and put on the MLS. And that's because I'm waiting for a good offer. And so the roughest part of the year, which we just passed now, we're going in Q2, and Q1 is historically always the slowest kind of dead season. And I'm still averaging 4 months through everything. So I love Florida for that reason. I think the demand offsets any kind of competition. You just got to learn your area. You got to really know what you're doing and know your backyard. But when it comes to minor subdivides, I think that process really applies to any state, because if you just start kind of indiscriminately going after subdivides, I'm going to go about this two ways. You can indiscriminately go after minor subdivides in states that tend to be very lax about their rules. Texas is the perfect example. Most minor subdividers are in Texas because it's a statewide regulation that allows you to be plat exempt at over 10 acres. So basically, they don't have to worry about county regulations over there. You just have to learn the nuances as to, does this area qualify for additional water taps and stuff like that. Texas is its own animal, but when it comes to the regulation side, it's the most lax in the country. So any subdivided course and all that kind of stuff, usually it'll be based with a person teaching you what they've learned from doing it out in Texas. I've seen other investors that have had some success doing it in North Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, areas like that, but you're not doing the big 100-acre, 200-acre split into 1 or 5 acre lots or 10-acre lots and stuff like that. It's usually like a 50-acre, maybe a 70-acre, and you split it into 3 or 4 pieces, because in those areas you have a lot more topographical concern. And so you tend to be following lines. And because of the topography, you don't really have the best road frontage a lot of the time. It's not flat like Florida or flat like Texas, where you have a bunch of squares everywhere. The roads are always meandering through the mountains. So naturally, you see that reflected in the boundary lines. So you don't get those massive economies of scale of being able to split into 100 different lots. But those areas tend to have lax regulations as well, where you can do 10 lots or whatever it is on something and they don't require much, but you have some additional requirements when it comes to percolation testing. Soils is massive in the Southeast. If you operate in the Southeast, everything that's like the great filter. Will it perk? That's the other reason why I love Florida. I don't worry about perk at all. I don't even think about it, because Florida is sandy soils and there's a massive aquifer, and you can get a well anywhere in Florida very easily. And all of that sand percolates incredibly well. The only time it doesn't is if you're majority wetlands, but that's its own filter in itself. If you have a majority wetlands on a property, it's probably not a good property and people tend to avoid it. Yeah, I think it's just the same approach when it comes to minor subdivides. You call that planning and zoning department. You talk with the technician. You pull up the Muni code, and usually you can just Google county name, blah blah blah, state, Muni code, land development code, or Muni code, and on your top links, you'll end up finding that land development section for subdivisions. You can type in minor subdivision or whatever they call it, and have that pulled up. Read it a few times through before you call planning and zoning department and figure out who has the most lax regulations. A lot of the times that just comes down to having an Excel sheet and you're calling all these different counties and you're just trying to figure out what county allows you to split the most for the smallest piece of land without qualifying as a major subdivision, right? You're trying to toe that threshold. But that's really the process anyway. You're going to get far better answers doing it in North Carolina, right? Most counties there are like between 7 to 12 parcels and up, and you still qualify as a minor subdivision. But in Florida, you can only split it once. We don't care if it's 100 acres. If you want to be a minor subdivision, you only have 250s. That's it, right? So Florida is really unfriendly when it comes to that stuff. So it takes, when I say dozens of hours to vet through every county in Florida, especially because a lot of times they don't pick up, or this is going to be any state, but they don't pick up. They don't know what you're talking about, and you got to find another technician. It's a hassle, but once you do all the work, it ends up being worth it. But yeah, that would be my recommendation on what that process looks like. How you get started is you find the most lax counties, and then you specifically target for that.